It was a cold November evening in 2007 when three police officers, who weren't on duty, stepped into a small diner in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. They were laughing loudly, telling jokes, and looking around for a place to sit. In the corner of the diner, by the window, they spotted a man sitting quietly. He was wearing a plain black hoodie and old-looking jeans. His messy hair was tucked behind his ears, and he looked ordinary, like any regular person. But there was something about him that felt a little familiar. That man was Keanu Reeves, a famous actor known for being kind and humble. But the police officers didn't know much about him except that he was a Hollywood star. They whispered to each other, wondering what he was doing alone at such a simple place so late at night. "Isn't he super rich?" one officer jokes. "Looks like he doesn't spend any of that money on his clothes," said another, laughing. The officers didn't keep their voices down as much as they thought they were. Keanu heard them but didn't react much. He was sipping coffee calmly and had a small, polite smile on his face. After a few minutes, the officers walked over to his table. But instead of being friendly, they started teasing him. "Hey, did you just shop at a thrift store?" one said with a smirk. "Do you need help paying for that coffee? We can start a fundraiser," added another. Keanu didn't get upset. Instead, he stayed calm, nodded, and even thanked them for their service as police officers. Then he went back to reading a small leather journal that was on the table in front of him. But the officers weren't done. "What's in that journal? Is it your script for the next Matrix movie?" one asked sarcastically, leaning closer to look at it. Keanu didn't say a word. He simply turned the page and kept reading. But then something on the table caught the officer's attention. Next to the journal was a folded piece of paper that looked old and a little worn out. The paper had drawings on it, colorful and simple, like something a child would make. At first, the officers thought it was nothing special. But as they looked closer, they saw it was a treasure. The drawings were stick figures of a man and a little girl. In one drawing, they were holding hands. In another, they were laughing. There was even a picture of the two of them standing on what looked like a movie set. Written in bright letters, in the messy handwriting of a child, were the words, "Thank you for being my hero, Uncle Keanu. Love, Elena." The officers stopped laughing. Their smirks faded. Suddenly, they realized there was more to this man than they had assumed. The paper was taped together at the edges, showing that it had been kept safe for a long time. The officers didn't know what to say. They exchanged awkward glances and quietly walked away. Keanu noticed their change in attitude, but he didn't say anything. He finished his coffee, left a big tip on the table, and walked out of the diner into the chilly night. The folded paper wasn't just a cute drawing. It was a memory that Keanu carried everywhere he went. It reminded him of Elena, a young girl who had brought light into his life during a dark time. Years earlier, in 2003, Keanu had gone through heartbreaking losses. First, his girlfriend Sophia died in a terrible car accident. Before that, they had faced the sadness of losing their baby girl, who was born too early to survive. Keanu was crushed, but he didn't let the pain make him bitter. Instead, he decided to be kind to others, using his own grief to understand what others were going through. That was when he met Elena. Elena was the 6-year-old daughter of Keanu's childhood friend, Tom. Harris was a single dad, trying his best to raise Elena after her mom passed away from cancer. Life was tough for them. Harris was always tired, and Elena was a quiet, thoughtful little girl who seemed to carry a lot of sadness. Keanu stepped in to help. He would visit often, bringing books, toys, and most importantly, his time. He played games with Elena, told her stories, and listened when she wanted to talk. They became close, and Elena started calling him Uncle K. Keanu called her his bright star because she always seemed to bring a little light into his life, no matter how sad he was. But life wasn't done being unfair. In 2006, Harris got very sick with a rare illness. Keanu stayed by his friend's side, helping with medical bills, taking him to doctor appointments, and making sure Elena felt safe. But despite all the efforts, Harris passed away later that year. Elena was only 9 years old and had no other family to take care of her. She was about to be sent into foster care. But Keanu couldn't let that happen. He stepped in and became her legal guardian. Even though he wasn't her real dad, he loved her like she was his own daughter. He promised to take care of her and make sure she always felt loved. The folded paper with Elena's drawing and message was her way of saying thank you. She gave it to him on her 12th birthday. Keanu kept it close to him at all times as a reminder of how far they had come together. As Keanu rode his motorcycle through the quiet streets of Los Angeles that night, he thought about Elena. She was 17 now and in her last year of high school. She had grown into a kind and creative young woman. She loved drawing and wanted to be an artist someday. But recently they had faced a new challenge. Elena had gotten sick and needed special treatments. Keanu was scared of losing her, but he didn't let her see his fear. He stayed strong for her just as he always had. When he arrived home, the porch light was on. Elena was standing in the doorway holding her sketchbook. She smiled when she saw him. "Hey, Uncle K," she said. "You're late. I made dinner, spaghetti. But don't get too excited. It's just spaghetti." Keanu laughed, feeling some of his worries fade away. "Spaghetti sounds perfect," he said, walking inside. Their home was small and cozy. It wasn't fancy or filled with expensive things, but it was full of love. Drawings that Elena had made were framed and hung on the walls. There were pictures of the two of them laughing and books stacked on almost every surface. As they ate dinner, Elena showed him her latest drawing. It was a picture of the two of them sitting under a big tree, smiling. Underneath the picture, she had written, "Family is who you hold on to when the world lets go." Keanu felt his chest tighten with emotion, but he didn't let it show. He reached across the table, squeezed her hand and said, "You're my bright star, Elena. Always." Later that night, after Elena went to bed, Keanu sat alone in his small study. The room was lined with books and more of Elena's artwork. On the desk in front of him was his journal, filled with memories of their journey together. He opened it to a fresh page and began to write. His hand trembled a little as he started putting his thoughts into words. He wrote about how much Elena meant to him, how proud he was of her, and how he would do anything to make sure she had a bright future. No matter how hard life became, Keanu and Elena knew they would face it together. Their love for each other was unshakable, and their bond was as strong as family could ever be. After Elena's father passed away, there was one night when she smiled for the first time again. It was a small, fleeting moment, a quick flash of happiness during a silly game of charades. Her dad used to write in his journal about those little things that made her happy, like staying up late to finish a painting for an art competition. He'd always talk about how her face would light up whenever she won first place. Those happy memories, those little moments of hope, were the only things keeping him together. But tonight, that deep fear he had been holding back for so long finally broke through. Elena's health had been getting worse, faster than anyone expected. The doctors had been optimistic, but they were careful with their words, warning that the treatments would be tough. Keanu had done everything he could to shield her from the hardest parts, but even he couldn't ignore what he saw every day. The sparkle in her eyes was fading more and more, replaced by exhaustion, something no child should ever have to experience. He closed the journal and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He was used to carrying burdens, enduring silently. But this was different. This wasn't just about him. This was about Elena, the one person he couldn't imagine losing. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. "Uncle K?" Elena's voice was soft and hesitant. "Come in," he called, quickly wiping his eyes. Elena stepped inside, her sketchbook tightly clutched to her chest. She looked so small in her oversized sweater. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted softly. Keanu patted the chair next to him, making room for her. She climbed up, tucking her legs under her. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. "I was thinking about Dad tonight," Elena said quietly. He nodded, giving her space to continue. "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" Her voice trembled slightly. Keanu felt his heart twist. "Elena, your dad would be so proud of you," he said firmly. "You're brave, kind, and talented, everything he ever dreamed you would be." Tears filled her eyes, but she managed to smile. "Sometimes I feel like he's still here watching over us." Keanu reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "He is," he whispered softly. "And so is your mom. They'd both be so proud of how strong you've been." Elena hesitated, then opened her sketchbook to a new page. "I started drawing something for you," she said quietly, handing it over to him. Keanu looked down and saw the beginning of a portrait, his face framed by a glowing light. Beneath it she had written, "You're my hero." For the first time in a long time, Keanu couldn't hold back his emotions. Tears streamed down his face as he pulled her into a gentle hug. "No," he whispered. "You're my hero, Elena." They stayed like that for a long time, the weight of their shared pain and love filling the room. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but in that moment they found solace in each other. After Elena had fallen asleep, Keanu returned to his desk and opened the journal again. He stared at the empty page, his thoughts racing. Finally, he wrote one line at the top, "No matter what happens, love endures." And with that, he closed the book, ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, late-night conversations, and quiet moments of reflection. Keanu never left Elena's side. He went with her to every doctor's appointment, every painful treatment, and every sleepless night. He held her hand as she winced in pain, keeping his strength for her, even when he felt like his world was falling apart. One afternoon, while Elena was resting in the hospital, Keanu sat in the small chapel. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above him as he stared at the flickering candles lining the altar. He hadn't prayed in years, but tonight he found himself whispering into the silence. "Please give me strength," he murmured softly. "Not for me, for her." His voice cracked. "She's just a kid. She deserves a chance at life, at happiness. If you have to take it out on me, do it. Just don't let her suffer." His plea hung in the air, unanswered. The weight of helplessness pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. That evening, Elena surprised him with a request. "Uncle K," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can we take a drive tomorrow? Just us." Keanu hesitated. She looked so weak, her energy barely lasting through the day. But the spark in her eyes, the determination, made him nod. "Anything you want, kiddo." The next morning, Keanu carefully helped Elena into the car, wrapping a blanket around her to shield her from the cold winter air. "Where to?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. Elena smiled faintly. "Somewhere with a view." They drove for hours, winding through the hills outside Los Angeles. Elena stared out the window, watching the world pass by. Her face was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, her expression calm but thoughtful. Keanu glanced at her often, memorizing every detail, the curve of her smile, the way her hair framed her face, the quiet strength in her gaze. Finally, they reached a secluded overlook. The city spread out beneath them in a sea of twinkling lights. Keanu parked the car, and they sat in comfortable silence, the hum of the engine their only companion. "Do you remember the time you taught me to ride a bike?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Keanu laughed softly. "I remember you falling at least 10 times before you finally got it." Elena chuckled, though it was weak. "And you ran after me every single time, even when I said I didn't need help." "That's what uncles are for," Keanu replied, trying to keep the mood light, though his heart ached. Elena's expression grew serious now. "You've always been there for me, Uncle K, through everything. I don't think I would have made it this far without you." Keanu swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "You're stronger than you know, Elena. I'm just here to remind you of that." When they finally returned home, Elena was exhausted but content. She leaned against Keanu as he carried her to her room, her breathing soft and steady. "Thank you for today," she whispered as he tucked her in. "It was perfect," Keanu said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Get some rest, bright star. We've got more adventures to plan." As he left her room, he paused in the doorway, watching her sleep. The ache in his chest was unbearable, but he knew he had to stay strong, for her. In the days that followed, Keanu began working on something special, late at night when Elena was asleep. He poured his heart into it, determined to show her just how much she meant to him. He gathered her drawings, her notes, and her photographs, compiling them into a book filled with their shared memories. On the final page, he wrote a message to Elena. "My bright star, you've taught me the true meaning of love and courage. No matter where life takes us, you'll always be with me. Love, Uncle K." The book became his lifeline, a testament to their bond. But as Elena's condition worsened, Keanu had to confront the unbearable truth. He wasn't ready to let go. As the weeks passed, Elena's condition worsened each day, taking a little more of her strength. Still, she smiled, she laughed, and she kept drawing whenever she could. Her sketchbook became her sanctuary, a place where she poured out her dreams, her fears, and her love for life. Keanu was always there. He cooked her favorite meals, even when she could barely eat. He read her stories when she was too tired to hold a book. And when the nights grew quiet, he sat by her bedside, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement, even as his heart broke. One evening during a storm, Elena asked Keanu to bring her sketchbook. Her voice was faint, but her determination was clear. He handed it to her and she opened it to a blank page. Her trembling hand gripped a pencil. "What are you working on?" Keanu asked softly, sitting beside her. She smiled weakly. "A surprise for you?" Keanu didn't press. He simply watched as she worked, her pencil moving slowly but deliberately across the page. When she finished, she handed the sketchbook to him, her eyes glistening with tears. Keanu looked down and saw a drawing of the two of them standing under a tree, blossoms in full bloom above them, the sun shining brightly. Beneath it, she had written, "Thank you for being my light, even when everything felt dark." Keanu felt tears stream down his face as he looked at her. "Elena," he began, his voice breaking, "I wanted you to have this. So you'll always know you were my hero." She hugged him gently, her tears soaking into his shirt. "I'll never forget, Elena, not ever." That night, Elena slipped into a deep sleep, her breathing steady but faint. Keanu stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering the stories they loved to share. In the early hours of the morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, Elena quietly passed away. Her face was peaceful, serene. Keanu held her hand until the nurses came, his heart shattered, but filled with gratitude for the years they had shared. In the days that followed, Keanu found solace in the memories Elena had left behind, her drawings, her laughter, and her unwavering spirit. They became his source of strength. He honored her by publishing the book he had made, a tribute to their bond and the love that had kept them going. The book, Bright Star, became a symbol of hope for others facing loss and hardship. People from all walks of life found comfort in its pages, inspired by the story of a young girl who had taught the world that even in the face of darkness, love could shine brighter than any star. Years later, Keanu stood at the edge of a quiet meadow, a single cherry blossom tree blooming in the center. He carefully placed a small plaque at its base, engraved with the words Elena had once written to him. "Family is who you hold on to when the world lets go." As the wind carried petals around him, Keanu closed his eyes and smiled, feeling Elena's presence in the warmth of the sun and the whisper of the breeze. She was gone, but her light would never fade. And in that moment he knew he had kept his promise, to live, to love, and to never let the sadness win. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.